Hi, and welcome to the Florida Aviation Network's Plane Time 27 broadcast. I'm Ron Timmermans, one of the many hosts for the Florida Aviation Network, and I'm delighted that you've joined us today for what is going to be a really interesting program. We've got two great guests today, and we're all about aviation safety, and so our job is to bring you content that will make you a safer pilot and make our aviation industry even safer. So I'm substituting today for my colleague, Mr. Ben Coleman, who is on a special assignment in Pennsylvania, of all places. Yeah, Ben is up there covering what's called Sentimental Journey. It's an opportunity for all of the Piper Cubs in the world, if they can, to make it back to their birthplace in the Piper factory that was in Lock Haven, Pennsylvania. So Ben, if you're watching, we're looking for some good photos and some wonderful interviews that you're going to be doing while you're up there this week in Lock Haven at Sentimental Journey. And we'll welcome you back here to Plane Time the next time we do this. As I mentioned, we've got two great guests today. One of them is here with me, Mr. George Bartuska. And George, welcome back again. It's good to have you. George is a well-known entity in the Florida Aviation Network Plane Time broadcast. He's been with us of the 27 times that we've done this now. You've probably been with us half those times or more?
Probably.
Yeah, it's been quite a while. So it's back again for another session on unique aspects of weather, or in this case, an update on something that we'll be talking about in a few minutes on hurricanes. So it's good to have you back. Later on in another segment, we'll have Raul Salazar to speak to us about drones with another host. So, George, it's good to have you back. You know, in the past, we've had you on the program, and we've just kind of released the program to you, and you've given us a presentation on tornadoes or weather instrumentation or hurricanes before and the like. But what we really want to do this time is learn a little bit more about the person behind the presentation, what makes George Bartuska tick. And so he's got an interesting background. We know him here at Florida Aviation Network as the weather guy, right? But he, in addition to having a doctorate in meteorology, George is also a military veteran. He's been a school teacher. He's been a volunteer. He's been an inspiration to many people, and as I mentioned, he's been on Plane Time several times here. George, I'd like to kind of step through for our audience your life and career, if we can. This is your life, George Bartuska, so that we can get to know a little bit more about you and give us context for what you present to us all the time. So, early years for you were growing up in Indiana, as I recall.
Yeah, I grew up in South Bend, Indiana, where we have both winter and summer, and there were really four things, I think, that got me interested in weather. The first was, of course, living through winters and summers. The second was a very unique meteorologist on TV named Dick Addis, who was out of the University of Notre Dame, and he would literally draw the weather map as he did the weather. Nobody did what he did. The next thing was that I can remember were the Palm Sunday tornadoes in 1965. This is not to be confused with the super outbreak in 1974, but this was an incredible outbreak in 1965 of tornadoes in northern Indiana. And luckily, they didn't affect us, but my dad stuck us in the car, and we went to see what happened, and it looked like a war zone.
So this is some 60 years ago, this tornado, when you were a young boy,
right?
And probably had a big impact on you. I remember one of my grandsons, at a very young age as well, experienced a tornado near his hometown, and that changed his life as well and his focus. And he now is a meteorologist, just like you.
There we go.
Become. So things that happen to us early in our life can really have an impact on what we do and what we end up being in a later time in life.
Yeah.
So this tornado didn't blow through your hometown, but very near, was it?
Very near. It went into Elkhart, when Elkhart's about 20 miles from South Bend. And of course, there were probably 70 tornadoes that went through northern Indiana and Ohio, comparing that to the super outbreak in '74, where there were 180 tornadoes.
Wow!
So, but it was pretty dramatic.
Were you still there in 1974, or had you moved on?
By then I was in the Navy and North Island Naval Air Station.
But you did experience that first one 60 years ago in 1965.
Oh yeah,
that's amazing. So is Is northern Indiana part of the so-called Tornado Alley, as
Oh,
we've
yeah.
been told?
Yeah, the real Tornado Alley is in Oklahoma and Nebraska and Kansas and northern Texas, etc. But certainly Indiana and Ohio are part of that. It's, you know, it's hard saying it's totally local, because tornadoes can happen anywhere.
Indeed. So tell me a little bit more about Mr. Addis, this weather person on TV, I trust.
Mm-hmm.
He had a map behind him.
Right.
And he would draw the fronts and the high and low pressure areas, and that just mesmerized you, huh?
Yeah, I had no idea how he was doing that from memory. Now, as an adult, I can tell you, everything was on a fax machine then. There were no computers yet. And he probably had the fax of the weather right there next to him. So when he's looking at the camera just like I am, he could look over at the weather map and turn around and draw the frontal boundaries and stuff, and I was just amazed.
Yeah, that's great. That's
so
great.
What went with that was books. My mother was a librarian, and one of the books that I got from the Time Life Science series was on weather, and it had a chapter in there about a boy who built his own weather station, predicted the weather, won the National Science Fair contest for a scholarship to go to college. Now, there were no drawings, no dimensions, but I took what was in that book and built my own weather station.
Wow, so another inspiration for you, this time with a book.
Right.
So so you continued to grow and went to high school in South Bend, I trust?
Right.
And what did you do? Did you go out to the airport at all? Or?
Yes, I started riding my bike out to the South Bend Airport, and I would go to the Weather Bureau, and I kind of got to know the forecasters out there. And one guy in particular, a Mr. Green, he must have either had kids or had some teaching experience, but he really tried to mentor me and tell me things like, he would say, go over to that cabinet, take all those weather instruments out, lay them on the floor, look at it, and when you're done, put them back in. None of the other people would have done that. That was a pretty amazing thing. The other thing that started happening in high school, I worked in the cafeteria for 4 years in high school, and we had friends who owned a Shell station, so I worked in the gas station during the summer, and then I had a lawn mowing business in the summer. So I was always busy. All the money I made cutting grass, I bought weather instruments with. And while I was working in the gas station, I was exposed to a lot of different things. But all of a sudden, my boss was rebuilding a carburetor, and that was pretty cool. And I learned to rebuild carburetors, all kinds of carburetors.
So you got into technical stuff and
Right.
instrumentation at an early age while you were still in high school. Then.
Right.
That's great. So graduated from high school in the early 70s, I think you said, and then went
72.
off to the Navy?
Went right in the Navy, went to Great Lakes Boot Camp, and then went to Millington, Tennessee, where the aviation schools were then for the Navy. I think they're now all in Pensacola. But while I was there, they had a flying club. And to rent an airplane, this is 1972, 73, to rent an airplane, it was $9.50 an hour solo, $15 an hour with a instructor, and if you washed an airplane, you got a free hour of flight time.
Wow, that was an incentive for you, I'm sure, and,
Oh, yeah.
and other people around there. So you got some initial flight training towards a private pilot certificate, but
Right.
had to leave before you could finish. Is that what
That's
you told
right.
me?
I just as I was getting ready to take the practical, I graduated from school and I got stationed at North Island Naval Air Station in San Diego, and they didn't have a flying club, and the closest civilian airport besides Lindbergh Field was I think Covington, which was like 30 miles away. So I didn't fly again for a long time.
Yeah, understood. So what else did you do in the Navy? You worked first at the school in Millington, then at North Island, and then
Right.
you were stationed on a carrier, were you, for a while?
Yeah, well, when I originally got to San Diego, they had Grumman S-2 trackers. They were built in the 1950s, anti-submarine aircraft, the carrier-based version of the P-3 Orion, and they were just phasing those out when I got there. So when I got to San Diego, I had free time to go to a lot of different schools, and then we started to get the S-3 Viking, the Lockheed S-3 Viking, which was a computerized version of the S-2, and my particular rate, which was an AME, I was responsible for the air conditioning systems, the ejection seats, the oxygen breathing systems, the firefighting systems, and any other safety equipment and anything that touched the bleed air system, like pressurization.
So, although your desire would have been to be a weather person or weather
Right.
service officer in the Navy, they didn't have a spot for you, and so you were an aircraft mechanic working on several different aircraft, devoted to safety in aviation, so
That's right.
there's certainly an underlying thing there. That's good. So 4 years in the Navy or longer?
4 years.
Okay.
And while I was in San Diego, I started going to college at night studying meteorology. And once we had the planes about a year, they flew us. Our pilots all had to transition from the S-2 reciprocating to the S-3 turbine aircraft. They flew us to Norfolk and put us on the USS John F. Kennedy. And for about 3 months, we went up and down the east coast of the United States, carrier qualifying the pilots. And then we went back to Norfolk for a month, and then we went to the Mediterranean, where they looked for Soviet subs. That was what that plane was designed for. And we were over there until November 22nd of 1975, when the John F. Kennedy collided with the USS Belknap.
Ooh.
It was one of the worst accidents in naval history on the water. Luckily, I didn't get hurt, and that was kind of the beginning of the end of the cruise. And so then we all came back to San Diego, and I finished what I could going to college. I got out of the Navy in June and went right to Purdue in West Lafayette, Indiana.
Back to Indiana, where
Right.
you pursued a degree, but not in meteorology, as I recall.
No. And here's what we got to remember. In 1973, we pulled out of Vietnam, and so the bulk of people that had exposure to the GI Bill were able to start using that going to college. So I got out 3 years after that in 1976. And when I got to Purdue, I had to take a test, because I now know this in retrospect from talking to people, but a lot of GIs were using their GI Bill, going to colleges for a year or two and dropping out. And that did not make people happy.
I'm sure not. Not a good use of taxpayer
Yeah.
dollars.
So I had to take this test, and probably because I grew up in farmland and I had baled hay and worked with dairy cows and done all that stuff on the side, I tested high in agriculture, and they said, look, you can take ag engineering, ag economics, education, but the recommendation at that time for ag was to combine ag engineering and ag economics, so that's what I took.
And so that was what you pursued your bachelor's in?
Right.
Very good. And from Purdue University.
That's right.
And as I recall, that's the legacy university for your family?
That's right. Everyone except my sister, the trader, went to IU.
And she'll be forgiven, I'm sure.
That's
so
right.
That's good. All right, so, excuse me, after graduation from Purdue then, into industry in a technical role.
Right.
Is that correct?
Right.
Hometown organization or hometown company?
Yeah, the Bendix Company, my dad had worked there 50 years. My brother worked there 30 years. So there wouldn't be any problem with me getting a job there. But of course, now as an ag engineer, I wanted to work on farm machinery. But this is 1979, and we were heading into a recession. So even though I interviewed with John Deere and a lot of different ag companies, they weren't hiring. So my brother said, why don't you come to work for Bendix for a while? Well, since I'd been an aircraft mechanic and I had all that experience in high school rebuilding carburetors, when you go to the Bendix Energy Controls Division, the first thing you would do is spend a month or two in training, learning about reciprocating engines, gas turbines, and then carburation systems and aircraft fuel controls. And I just kind of thought, well, maybe this is what I'm going to do the rest of my life. And I did that until I was there 2 years, and I got a phone call from a headhunter who said, would you like to double your salary?
Ooh, that would be interesting to any of us, right?
That's right.
Yeah,
and
so this was the transition to Martin Marietta then?
That's right. Martin Marietta, now Lockheed Martin. Mm-hmm. And I came down here, and all of a sudden...
Down here to Florida.
Yeah, down to Florida, to Orlando. And all of a sudden, I was using some of my meteorology background, because part of what I did was test. Mill Standard 810, if anybody knows what that is. At the time I got to Martin Marietta, it was Mill Standard 810D. It's now Mill Standard 810H. But I was put in a group to do vibration testing and acoustic testing on equipment. And what they do is they put them on an electrodynamic shaker and roll it into an environmental test chamber, where we could go from minus 60 degrees all the way up to 180 degrees, cycle back and forth and vibrate, because you're looking for defects in the product.
Temperature changes, swings almost like you had in Indiana.
Right.
Maybe a little bit worse than that.
Or even like if you take a F-18 on the deck in San Diego where it's 95 degrees, the pilot can take off and be at 30,000 feet and at 60 degrees below zero.
Big time difference.
So everything's got to be able to work in those conditions.
Well, George, in the time remaining, I just wanted to advance in your career. So This was also technical work, some based on the experience you had in the Navy, and then also your degree in agricultural engineering and economics. But then tough times hit in the early 2000s, 2007, 8,
Right.
where the whole country went into a recession and the like. And so you transitioned then to education, is that correct?
Yeah, the only engineers got laid off all over the country. The only job I could find was in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. My wife was born and raised in Central Florida. We're not going to where it's 40 below zero. And a lot of her girlfriends were teachers. And even then, Florida was so hard up for science and math teachers. They paid the $5,000 for me to get my teaching certificate, and I taught the next 15 years until COVID.
Interesting. So sometimes spouses have a little bit to say about relocating to various places. And I tell you, after living in Florida for as long as I have now, I wouldn't want to go back to the Midwest where I grew up either.
Right.
The summers are great there. Spring and fall are beautiful, but the winters are just brutal. So you stayed here and you taught at the Central Florida Aviation Academy in Lakeland,
Right.
which was an up-and-coming school. You were there as it was starting.
Yep.
And saw it through great expansion and the like. But since then, you have also been doing a lot of volunteer work, probably throughout your career. But I know specifically you've done volunteer work at for the ASCE, the American Society of Civil Engineers,
Right.
for the Civil Air Patrol, and then also for the Coast Guard, and of course for the Florida Aviation Network. By the way,
Right.
we really thank you for your volunteer work for us. This is wonderful. We get a lot of good out of what you do and what you present to us for very little cost.
That's right.
We give you some donuts and
Donuts.
coffee and a bottle of water every once in a while. Well, thank you for all that volunteer work and the like. And then while you were doing this, the last part of your career, you also pursued advanced education and earned your doctorate in meteorology at the age of, shall we say, 60 plus.
Right.
Yeah, that's good. So very few of us have pursued higher education that late in life, and that speaks well of you, of course. So I just wanted to again mention the evolution of George Bartuska. We've got an essay series of photos that shows you at your different stages in life. If we can get that up, that would be great. If not, we'll just talk about it. We've learned about you in your early life, how you were inspired by a number of people and books and the like to become a weather person. You've finally made that and the like. So this has been part of what we call Sky Insights, learning more about some of our guest speakers, as we've done with Mr. Bartuska, Dr. Bartuska today. Thank you so much for being with Plain Time today and allowing us to learn all about Dr. George. This has been great. I want you to stay tuned now, our audience. Stay tuned. We are going to have more segments. Dr. Bartuska is going to lead us through some new and useful information to us as we enter the hurricane season, or we're now in the hurricane season in Central Florida. And then following that, Raul Salazar is going to be presenting some material on drones that will be equally as interesting, I'm sure. So for the Florida Aviation Network, thank you so much for joining us. Stay tuned. More to follow, and it's all about safety, and we are going to present topics to you that make you a safer pilot. I'm Ron Timmermans of the Florida Aviation Network. Thank you for joining us.